Hosted by you/Vired times 3. My 32F husband, 33M, is a wonderful father and an amazing partner. He is a hard worker and just really wants to do good work. His problem is that he's a smart guy with lots of ideas and steps on people's toes too much. Before this last crazy year, my husband worked for 4 years for the same company. He jumped ship after he was passed over for a promotion and pay raise twice. We both knew he was taking on a certain amount of risk, but he landed a contract to hire job at a big company where there were a lot of resources available for him to succeed, so we were not worried about it. A few months after he started, he began complaining about his boss. He complained about how he hated being a clock puncher, complained that his boss was never around, and that she did everything wrong while everyone seemed okay with the status quo. I encouraged and supported him as best as I could, while also encouraging him to continue applying for other jobs and interviewing while he still had a job, just in case he did not want to stay there or they did not convert him to full-time after his contract was over. Long story short, he did not keep his head down and search for other jobs. One misstep later, his boss terminated his 1-year contract after 6 months for conflicting management style. I worked in HR, I know what that means. His next contract gig lasted him a week, and then he approached me with the idea of not going back to work full-time but starting his own company. It would mean spending all the money we had saved for a down payment on a house to support us and his business during this time. I made him promise he would try to seek gainful employment while trying to launch his startup. He promised but never delivered. He did not look for any other jobs until after he was turned down for venture capital on several fronts. He landed another contract gig after we had depleted our entire savings and racked up $10,000 in credit card debt. This new job was also a 1-year contract to hire position. The company was going through a restructure, so all he had to do was keep his head down, do a good job, and work hard. Instead, he tried to change the way everyone did things and managed to get into a conflict with a female employee who was best friends with his boss. Sure enough, he was called into her office after only 6 months on the job and fired. I'm at my wit's end. I am furious, angry, and hurt. How hard is it to just do your job when you have 3 kids and a wife at home? How hard is it to stop assuming risk when you're already in a vulnerable position? I am in school right now and I work 25 hours a week. We have 3 kids at home. We are also in escrow on our very first house after rebuilding our savings from last summer. Unless he starts a job next week, we are going to lose our house, and we have to be out of our rental in June. Maybe this is just an anomaly. I don't know. It feels like a pattern to me. When we met, he had been laid off from his employer, and the job before that he was fired after only a few months. The only long stint he had was the 4 years at the larger company, and he complained about that constantly too. I'm at my wit's end. I came home from work today, and he was eating ice cream sandwiches with 2 of our kids. I asked if he had followed up on any of his leads from last week, and he said no. I tried talking to him about how he comes across to people as an arrogant know-it-all when he walks into an office and tells people they are doing things wrong and tries to make a bunch of big changes. I tried telling him he needs to find a good balance between being a leader and being a good employee. I spent a decade in HR, this is valuable knowledge that I am bringing to the table. It seems to fall on deaf ears. Reddit, what do? I don't know how to handle this situation anymore. I don't know if this is a pattern of behavior or if this is just a run of bad luck. How do I stop hating my husband for being perpetually unemployed and putting our family at risk because he can't get his act together? Commenter. My brother is exactly like your husband, and he can't get a job to save his life now. It doesn't matter that my brother is smart or a good father because he's been fired from every job he's had in the past 3 years. He's been unemployed for 9 months, and he places blame everywhere but on himself. He is unbearable and thinks he knows everything. He's dug himself into a hole I'm not sure he can get out of, honestly. He couldn't even rent an apartment without a co-signer because of his work history. Why hire the guy that's been fired? Why hire the guy that can only provide references that are 5 years old? You don't, so your husband needs to address his issues with a therapist. His inability to deal with authority, especially women with authority, including you, is going to ruin him career-wise and potentially marriage-wise. Update 1. Hey Reddit, I got an inbox full of requests for an update, and my original post got a lot more attention than I thought it would, so I figured I would post an update. Unfortunately, my update is a sad one. We are going on week 5 of my husband's unemployment, and he still has no job offers. He has had several prospects, quite a few phone interviews, and exactly 1 in-person interview. As of right now, it doesn't look like he will be back to work even in the next few weeks, despite having promised me every week for the last 3 weeks that he would have a job offer. If he doesn't have a job offer before Wednesday, we will lose the house. To try and prepare for this, we filled out a bunch of rental applications because we have to be out of the house we are currently living in less than 3 weeks. All of our applications were denied as my husband has absolutely no income. So it looks like we will be living in someone's basement in short order. Several people mentioned me going back to work full-time, and sadly, that is not an option. My company isn't in a position to make me a full-time offer and won't be until midsummer. And yes, I've had this conversation with my boss. My job offer is contingent upon my continued studies, so school isn't something I can just drop right now. Based on the advice I received here, as well as from a close friend, I have tried to approach him several times about what the problem could be or how we might try a different way of figuring this out. Every single time, I was met with accusations of stressing him out, making him anxious, and eventually getting blamed for being the source of his nervousness, which he later said affected how his phone interviews went. I have asked if he has followed up regarding certain opportunities, and he tells me I am making him anxious by asking for updates so often. Yesterday, in fact, he told me that no one gets a job by following up with recruiters. I understand how recruitment works, but I have to ask myself how someone can dedicate the hours of 9 to 5 to getting a job in a highly in-demand field in an area that has jobs aplenty and still come up short. Isn't only one in-person interview too little? I've asked him to forego applications on websites and reach out to these hiring managers in person, or on LinkedIn, or anything but the conventional means of being hired, but he refuses to do so. Probably the most infuriating thing that has happened has been a warm lead on an opportunity. The chief operating officer of a small company reached out to him regarding a job that was a title below the job he was working at previously. He was recommended to this chief operating officer by a former co-worker of my husband's, who works at the company currently. In the course of a month, she reached out to him 6 different times by email. He never replied to a single one of her emails. Not even a thanks so much for considering me type thing. He told me he didn't respond to her because he didn't have to, and that he checked them out on Glassdoor and the reviews say it is a bad place to work and that they pay below market rates, so it would be a waste of his time. At this juncture, I am not sure what to do about my marriage. I'm having a hard time focusing on work and school right now. I'm eating everything in sight, trying to pack up a house that we are going to end up putting into a storage unit, and I have had actual nervous breakdowns 3 times in the last 2 weeks. That, and the neighborhood gossips have caught wind of our hard times, and now that there is blood in the water, they are circling. I don't want to break up my family, but I don't want to be married to someone I can't rely on anymore. Even if he did save the day and get a job in the next week or so, we could be in the same position in the not-so-distant future. I've already told him I'd like to go back to counseling as soon as we have access to the funds or benefits, and he has agreed. But I have no idea if this arrogant, entitled attitude towards work is something so deeply ingrained that it can't be worked out. I've had enough instability in my life, and I kept hoping that my marriage and our family would continue to be a source of stability, but it is not. I had more stability when I was on my own. It is a sad day when the saying the only person you can count on is yourself really rings true. Commenter. I am so sorry. Perhaps this may be a good time to have a trial separation. You and the kids can stay with a friend, but they won't have room for your husband. See what life is like when you don't have to manage your husband's life for him. Ops response. I know what happens in that case because I cleaned it up when we first got together. About a year into being married, all of a sudden, his paychecks stopped getting deposited into our joint account. He contacted HR, and as it turns out, his wages were being garnished for unpaid medical debts from before we were married. This happened 3 weeks before Christmas, and I had to cash out a 401k to cover us until I could figure things out. I had to get in touch with the garnishees to determine the damage, submit the paperwork they needed to come up with a payment plan, and do all of the legwork. He said he was too busy with work and didn't have time. When I went down the rabbit hole, it wasn't the only debt, and long story short, he had to file Chapter 13. I handled the bankruptcy, and he went to the 2 meetings he had to attend in person that I could not go to on his behalf. A year after the bankruptcy, I had built his credit back up. He had 2 unsecured credit cards in his name that I kept away from him and a credit score of 650, which isn't great, but it is better than what it was before the bankruptcy. So yeah, I know what happens when I am not handling everything.